5:30 for what? I don't know the times. He said he's going to slack out some times. I'll have to follow up with him after this. So what is a local variable? Remote. Amir, what's a local variable?
That's a variable that exists within your object or your function.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's correct. So what is scope? Go ahead.
The scope is the narrowest point where a variable exists. Scope is defined by, in Python, it's typically differentiated by brackets. In Python, it's differentiated by different levels of differentiation. And anything that is created within a certain scope is cleared out from memory and ceases to exist as soon as you are outside that scope.
No, yeah. So let's just create like a local variable name. Let's do here. And then if true, I'm going to print name. I'm going to run this. Here. Now, what if I were to create a function on def print name? And return print name. And I wanted to assign name to Michael. What would show up here? Nothing? Oh, yeah. Thank you. I have to invoke the function. And then let's do name. What would print, or what would show up here in the terminal? Amir? Michael? So I'm passing in the name.
Redefining name. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. So yeah, a local variable, kind of as Ethan, it's like a variable that's available within the immediate scope of either the file, the entire application, or within the method.
Or even within loops or conditionals within the method.
Right. Yeah. Yep. So let's move on. And you'll rarely ever, well, hold on. Let's go into instance variables. What's an instance variable?
That's the variable that's created each time you instantiate a class.
Okay. So let's do an example.
Additionally, with instance variables that may differ in value between instances of the variable.
So yes, an instance variable is a variable that's only available within that instance of that object. So you can have multiple instances, but that variable within that instance won't change across objects, multiple instances. So let's say we have a student, passing self, first name, last name, and branch of service. So how do we make a instance variable?
Self
Dot.
first name is equal to first name.
we're passing in first name, or assigning it to this instance variable. And this can actually be called something else other than first name. It could be called random instance variable, but general for readability, we like to keep them the same. And self dot. All right, if I wanted to print, like just print the full name, print full name, self. I don't really need to pass anything in because I've already got everything. It's been initiated when initializing the instance. So I'm just gonna instead of actually typing everything out. So I want to create a instance, like an actual instance of this instance variable, and print out my first, like the first name and last name. So Marcos equals student. What's your last name, Marcos? Oh no. CA?
Yes. Yes.
Army?
Yes.
Sweet. So I'm creating an instance object with Marcos. Now I've got access to this print full name method. So let's do this. Marcos. Full name. I'm calling this print full name method. Let's see what happens. Comment this off. Comment that out. Cool. So now what if I created like a Tom instant? Well, you guys understand that this new Tom instance doesn't have access to this Marcos first name and last name. So let's go and move on to class variables.
Can you refer to an instance variable from another file? Can you call it from another file? You'd have to import this class object into another file and then call it.
So the question was, can you refer to like this instance variable from another file? You could, you just have to import this student class into the file, and then you'll have access to everything within the student class, as well as that instance.
And then instantiate it.
Yeah, then you'd, and then in the new file, you'd like instantiate, yep. So class variables. What's a class variable? Hal, what's a class variable?
Sorry, the mute button. A variable available to all members of the class.
So, yes.
All instances created of the class carry that variable.
Perfect. So I'm just gonna copy this down here. And then I'm going to, and where would I define a class variable?
I believe you define it on the class declaration itself.
On the class declaration, like
Right there where you're at.
okay, yep. 0. So now if I wanted to increment the number of students across all class of all instances, how do I do that? Every time I instantiate a new class object.
I am not certain.
Anybody? So if I want to increment this every time I create a new student,
You just put it in the init block for that right there. So put it inside that block, inside that scope.
You can just add it there.
like, yeah, how would I access that variable?
You just say students. Sorry, number of students.
Student dot. So let's create a couple of I'm going to do two, just because. All right. Who else? Must be the name. Ethan. WHALEY. Yeah. So I'm instantiating these 3 class objects. Now how I want to check the number of students. I do Ethan dot. Does that work? There we go. So we got 3. So every time a new instance object is created, it comes in here, runs through the init, then it's taking students, it's taking the student class and accessing the class variable, it's adding 1. Coming here, so the class variable is accessed, as Hal said, through all classes, through all the questions you have.
So you get,
So I don't have a misconception about the formatting of classes. We can put the variables anywhere we want as long as it's within the end of that class, right? Like it's proper to put them up top, but you should be able to put them anywhere, right?
So the question was, can the class variable be put anywhere? And the answer is not anywhere, but like as long as it's the first indentation.
Yeah, so
Right.
what you're saying is
Can I-
If I decided to put it down here,
Yes.
but still in line, yes, you can do that.
Okay. I
But
don't know why I would want to do that. Maybe if it's more, maybe if it refers more to those particular functions than up top, maybe. But I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
it's not a.
So yeah, it's best practice to initialize all class variables at the very top. So as like a developer, if you're reading somebody else's code and you don't know if there's any other class variables, if they're like somewhere else in the class, if they're all the way at the bottom or just in between methods, you'd have to like comb through the code and be like, oh, there is a class variable. But it's good, it's best practice to have all your class variables at the top. So if someone else is reading your code, they know where the class variables all exist. They're like, oh, there's a class variable right there. They don't have to go searching for anything else.
I'm assuming it's good practice to reset the class variables there in the declaration so they're reset at every running of the program. Is that right?
Well, the class ceases to exist unless you're actually.
Yeah. So reinitialize or like you said, let me understand. You want it's best practice to reset this to 0?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Then you control. Well, I guess that's a question I have. Does it carry over the value set to that variable?
Yes. So this will carry over every time a student
That's basically
is created.
If we have like a database somewhere, we use but like I like register myself.
In any given session, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. But you are correct with any given session.
Thanks.
If you delete a student, it's only gonna, if it's
If-
initiated, maybe it's only gonna have two.
You'd have to,
I'd have to actually run a method that says delete student, and then, so if I wanted to delete a student, I'd have like cell or def delete student. Then I'd have to self, but like that instance still is like exists, the delete student. But if I just actually wanted to delete, like decrement that, I do student dot num of students minus like 1.
But
So that-
what I'm saying is if you just deleted one of them right now as an instance, would it, the counter would return two?
Yeah, it would return 2 because as Hal said, every, what was the term? Yeah, every session, every time I run the Python OOP is a single link session. I'm running it once, it's running the code once. It's not like storing it in a database, which we will be doing this week. Storage, so. Yes, Silas.
So in one code like this, can you have multiple classes?
Like within like a single file?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Yes.
So when you import,
So,
are you going to have access to all those classes?
so you're asking how you are going to import multiple classes within
So
a
you
file?
know how you say for us to have access to that class, so then you have to import to have a new code.
Mhm.
So when we import this code, all the classes come with it.
There is a way, there's some syntax that you can put to import everything, like all the classes. You won't just import a single class if there's multiple classes. So there's like a syntax. Yes, Stephen.
So what the init does is the init's our constructor. Actually, I had been doing some reading about this. It actually is a way of doing a destructor with underscore underscore, I think it's DEL underscore underscore.
Okay.
And when you actually delete an object, remember an object goes out of scope, then the destructor is run. So like if you create a student inside of a nested for loop, after you're done going through that for loop, the destructor will be automatically running. That would be where you put a decrement to your.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I did not know that. So there's a destructor, like a instead of def init, there's a def dunder do. Awesome. That's cool. Yeah, so you can actually, Ethan said, he did some research, and you can actually deconstruct, like actually delete an instance.
Most of the time, you don't worry about that unless you actually, because Python automatically does garbage collecting. You shouldn't clears things out of memory when they go out of scope or no longer reference. But in this instance, since we're using a class variable, and we want to actually keep track of that, might be one case where we would actually want to.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. That's awesome. Sweet. So let's move on to global variables. What's a global variable?
Bad.
Yeah. So a global variable is essentially a variable that is accessible throughout the entire application. So it's stored in memory until the application is done running. And it's a big no-no to have global variables. So for example, say if we have num101 and then def some function or some method. And then we can print the number. And I'm just going to comment this out for the time being. Then I'm going to some method. I'm going to invoke this method 101. Now, if you actually want to make a variable, a global variable, there's a keyword called global. I'm creating a global. So now this, I know it's been declared within this method. So it's essentially within only, if I only had like this number variable would only be accessible within the scope of this method. Yes.
What's the difference between a global variable and an actual class variable?
A global, what's the difference between a class? The class variable is only available to within that class, in a class instance. So anytime.
So basically, if you had like something that had like more than one class, is there a reason?
You would, no, you'd probably want to pass in a parameter to keep track of that.
I'm just wondering, like, if we're talking about object-oriented programming, what's it? So we would just have one class or something, right? And then you would just be working with that class. So declaring a global variable,
you wouldn't do that.
I mean, like, why does the function, or why does it exist?
Because it solved the problem at some point.
Okay.
Yeah. So global variables are defined by, yes.
So you now use the word global, and we define for class definition.
That would be like a local variable. It wouldn't be a global. So like this variable would be accessible to anywhere within the application, or a local variable is only defined within.
That's what I meant. So basically, like in an application, you have multiple classes within an application, right? So that global variable would actually
be accessible throughout every class.
Like it would be like accessible by a separate class.
Don't think of it as like a class, like what's accessible within the class specifically, but like, yeah, that global variable, I believe, would be accessible with everywhere within the class. I'm not 100% sure, actually.
Yeah.
I've never tested that before.
Yeah. But just don't have to.
Yeah. This is something you guys don't, just know that there's a global keyword that creates a global variable. You define it within a method. But remote, can you please mute? And then last we have constants, variables. What is a constant variable, and how, like from a syntactical perspective, what does it look like? Like that. So what is a constant variable?
Constant variable is not visible.
Something that's not supposed to change. Yeah.
Something that generally doesn't change, and we it's like gravity might be an example, because if you're in a space shuttle up in orbit, gravity is going to be different.
Yeah.
But
Pi.
Yeah, like pi.
like gravity would be a good example of a constant that could change.
Yeah.
Constant variable.
So like pi, and that's constants variable. It actually, so in JavaScript it's a little different, but in Python it's defined with all capital letters, and that's just an indication to the user that this value should never change. You should never change this value.
So that doesn't actually do anything.
Right. So if I wanted to actually change this, like something else, I wanted to print pi, I think it should still run. Yeah. But
it's just a marker for the people.
It's a marker for the other engineers, letting you know that, hey, this constant, this, like whatever it is, it's all capital letters, should never be changed.
Is there
Yes.
There was an import for Python that
is
can make constants, right? Is that help?
Like literally where you can't change it.
Yes, I could have swore that.
I am Googling that right now.
Because there's got to be a need for that.
I think you're right. I think there is a constant. No, it's sys.
Maybe I dreamed it.
Does What's the best way to define constants variable? Oh, see what I did. But that doesn't have, it's only got 16. But yeah. Okay. So it doesn't look like it. So yeah, constants are declared via all capital letters, and that's like a indication to this engineer that they don't change these variables. All right. Want to come back at 10:05? Yeah. At what time? Yeah. So come back at 10:05, and we'll continue with the
I think it starts
second
with 10
part.
though, so you know,